Hello everybody, welcome back to another Pandora Hearts discussion video. If you're new to this series, be warned, this is filled with spoilers for volume number 15 now. So if you haven't read this volume, go back and do it before watching this video because I'm going to spoil pretty much everything. The second rule of this series is that I have not read ahead, so anything that I'm kind of guessing at or kind of wondering about, it's really because I have only read up to this point. I don't allow myself to read ahead until I've recorded these videos and gotten them up. So let's get right into it because this one was a pretty heavy volume. So we start off with the immediate aftermath of Elliot sort of coming to the realization that he is, in fact, an illegal contractor. In fact, he is the core contractor for Humpty Dumpty. Something I mentioned in one of the previous videos was the whole idea of how there's a lot of really unreliable narrators in this series, whether it be because of their own ignorance, whether it be because of their own intentional deceptions, or whether it's because in some ways they've deceived even themselves. Now, in this case, we have Elliot who, because of Humpty Dumpty, has been, in a way, like, we could say that it's him deceiving himself, but Humpty Dumpty is definitely enabling that within him, and sort of like that devil pouring poison in his ear, saying, you know, this isn't really you that's causing this, it's the headhunter. And so this sort of beginning of this volume really deals with Elliot coming to terms with his own personal truth. And so we find out that, yes, he in fact did kill his own brothers. He killed his sister. Now, there's other stuff to be discussed about the whole headhunter thing sort of later on, because of course there's revelations there. But let's just deal with Elliot and particularly Leo right now, because these first sort of two parts, the two first chapters of this volume, it kind of got me thinking about a lot of stuff, and I'm going to try and do that instead of just doing, running this happened, then this happened. So let's talk a little bit about how Elliot became an illegal contractor, because the whole thing is that they find out that the kids went down into the pit of Sablier from Fianna's house, and so Elliot is like, we've got to go and get them, and we can't wait for Pandora. I mean, Elliot is... He's brash, right? We know that he's kind of stubborn. We know that maybe he's even a little bit too brave for his own good. But when it really boils down to it, I mean, he's got a good heart. He doesn't want anything to happen to these kids. And so he and Leo go down into the pit, and what we find out is that, and it's funny how he's even trying to convince himself, oh, we found the kids, everything was fine. And then he's like, no, that's not what happened. And so essentially, of course, they find out that one of the kids has come into contact with Humpty Dumpty. It's kind of gone berserk. It's killed some of the kids. And Elliot, thinking that it's now threatening Leo, goes to attack it, but it misinterprets what's happening and it attacks Elliot in a means of defending Leo, which ties into my whole thing. And we do find out in this volume for certain that Leo is in fact the one who's inherited the soul of Glenn Baskerville. And now this is what I want to talk about, because in this scene, we have Leo having a vision of the other Glenn Baskervilles. I mean, we see clearly the Glenn Baskerville that was friends with Jack, but we see other individuals. So, I mean, it's pretty safe to assume that there are the other Glens throughout the years. Now, here's what I'm not too sure about, and I'm hoping maybe you guys can help me out, because maybe I misinterpreted this, and call it lazy, call it lack of time, whatever you want to say. I don't really want to go back through a whole bunch of volumes to try and see if, reread a whole bunch of them at this point to try and figure it out. But I thought the whole point of these seals was to seal Glenn Baskerville's soul. In other words, to make it so that it was constantly repressed so that it couldn't surface. So that essentially, even if you were the reincarnation of Glenn Baskerville, or, had inherited his soul, or however that exactly works, that it would be repressed, that you would not even be aware of it, that Glenn Baskerville's, memories and ideas and thoughts and everything else would be completely hidden. That's what I thought the seals were all about. And yet, in this scene, it's very, very clear that not only is Glenn Baskerville and his assorted previous selves present in Leo's mind, but they've been talking to him for a while. and that it's only because of Leo's denial of them that he's sort of pushed it away, so he hasn't had this sort of constant stream of information. So it's not repressed in any way. In fact, it's only Leo himself. Now, maybe the seal is what it makes it strong enough for Leo to do that, but it seems more the conversation that he has with these visions, that it's actually just Leo's own determination, his own sense of self. And this kind of ties back, I was thinking, into the whole thing with Glenn in the previous volume, where he says to Jack that when my soul goes into that new body, the person is still them. That it's really just all of my memories and everything, and my abilities, my powers, like they are still their own person, but they inherit all of the things that I have been and all the previous Glenn Baskervilles have been. And this sort of experience seems to drive it home, because Leo is still his own person. Glenn Baskerville even says to him, you know, it's your own personal determination that has pushed us away. And the only reason we're surfacing right now is that subconsciously you're calling out for us because you think that we can help you save this boy's life. And so to me, it seems that suddenly the seal starts coming into question. We know that the seal is protecting, like it's preventing, the Baskervilles from sensing Glenn's soul, but it really doesn't seem to have any impact on Glenn's soul itself. So it seems to me like there's something really questionable going on here. Like the whole nature of Glenn and the whole nature of Sablier. And it got me thinking even that as I was reading the last volume, when Jack appears, he says that Glenn told me that the abyss was full of golden light, but to me, it's just a tomb. And in this volume, when Humpty Dumpty goes out of control, when that third seal is broken, or is it the second now at this point? I guess it would be it'd be the third. So when the third seal is broken and sort of everyone's chains go out of control and everything else, the chains say that they're sort of possessed by wanting to fulfill the intention of the abyss, which is to devour the bee rabbit. And I started thinking, like, is this wrong? Like, is Jack not the hero that we think he is? Because remember that history, there's often a saying that history is a tale of the victors, right? That we take a look at history through the lens of those who are victorious. And in this particular case, it is Jack who walked out of Sablier alive and quote unquote victorious. So how do we even really know for sure when we're talking about unreliable narrators? How do we even know for certain that the quote unquote memories we've been shown are legitimate? How do we even know that Glenn himself wasn't somehow a victim in this? Now, I know that the Baskervilles went nuts and started killing everybody, and they did that under Glenn's orders. So, I mean, obviously the tragedy of Sablier to an extent was Glenn's doing. But I just have to wonder if Jack isn't somehow complicit in this, or if Jack isn't somehow not more of a dark entity than what we've been led to believe. And I mean, I may be completely off base on this, but like I said, it just seems all of a sudden to me as I'm reading this, I'm like, if Glenn's soul is present in Leo and able to communicate to Leo, and, you know, we have this thing where Jack is like, the abyss is nothing but a tomb and everything else. Man, it just seems to me that suddenly Jack isn't the most reliable in terms of his narrative. And isn't it interesting, too, that Oz's InQs seems to be affected every single time these seals are broken? Why is that? Is it actually sealing Glenn? Or is it sealing Jack? Or is it sealing the bee rabbit? I mean, it just seems to me that these seals really aren't doing what they're supposed to do. And like I said, guys, if I'm wrong, by all means, say so in the comments down below. But as I'm reading this, I'm just kind of like, man, like Jack doesn't seem to be like that good a guy. And like he even the whole thing where, you know, they don't want Oz to kill, and yet Alice doesn't seem to have the same sort of repulsive reaction when Jack says, yeah, it was me that killed the guy. She doesn't seem to be put out by it the same way that she does by the idea of Oz killing someone. So again, it's like this idea that she's defending Oz's innocence, but yet Jack gets away with being a murderer. So again, like it's I don't know where to go with this other than to say that I don't trust Jack right now. I don't trust him. I don't trust his motives, and I have reason to suspect that he is just as perhaps complicit or evil as even Glenn can be. And is Glenn even evil? I mean, I don't know, because at this point you can't really trust anybody in this. So we finally have Elliot, though, become our dependable narrator, about the only one that we can truly trust. And it is in his death that he becomes a trustworthy character. Because in his death, he refuses to see the falsities. He refuses to see the illusions, and instead chooses to deny Humpty Dumpty, even though he knows that it's going to mean his death. And in doing so, what I thought was really cool in this whole thing was that even though he knows that he's going to die, the one main reason that he's doing it, even though he puts on a proud face like, you know, whatever, he says that he won't have Oz shoulder his death. He won't have him become a burden for Oz, because as Oz is, you know, killing the Humpty Dumpty clones that are attacking, it is affecting Elliot. And so Vincent, who of course has found Elliot at this point, he says to him, you know, you can choose, right? You can die because Oz is killing these other clones, or I can kill you. You know, what are you going to do? And Elliot's like, none of you are going to have that on you. It's all going to be on me. And so Elliot sacrifices himself to stop Humpty Dumpty and to also prevent his friend Oz from bearing the burden of his death. Also interesting in this was the whole little thing where we find that Break does finally break down and kind of tell Gil that, you know, Vincent is involved with the Baskervilles, or he has reason to believe he is. And we see Gil stopping Vincent from about to shoot the seal. And so Gil knows that Vincent is involved in this, and he knows that he is trying to sort of undo the good. And so it puts them at odds. So now as we shift into the next part of the manga, of this volume, we start off sort of, I guess, several days later, and I thought that it was pretty impactful, just that black page, and it just said, Elliot is dead. And because that statement, that truth, it affects now everything that happens in the rest of this volume. So as a result of what happened in Isla Llora's mansion, we find out that the status quo has sort of shifted a little bit. Oz is kind of in a funk for obvious reasons. I kind of liked his whole statement about when Alice approaches him. I liked his statement that he was like, you know, despite everything that's happened, the sky is still blue. And that really frustrates me or irritates me. I can't remember precisely the words he used, but I liked that whole idea that he was angry and upset and frustrated by the fact that even though it felt like the whole world had changed and that it was no longer as good a place as it had been, that the rest of the world just keeps on rolling, just keeps on going. And I think when you deal with grief, like, you know, that's the truth, right? That you do become aware in a sense that you feel detached from the world because the world keeps spinning the same way it always does, regardless of what's going on within you. And Alice, I really love her. I love her a bit, trying to cheer him up by biting his ear, and she bites it hard enough that he bleeds. And I almost, like, I kind of thought in this case, you know, I don't know how to how to, like, sort of look at their relationship. Like, I mean, it's clear that Oz has some deep-seated feelings for Alice, like beyond what we've seen. I mean, he says that he's like, when he sort of goes psycho or whatever, it's all usually because he wants to destroy whatever it is that threatens Alice. He wants to destroy or end whatever it is that is making her cry or making her sad. And in this moment, even though she's hurting him in a way, it's almost like she's clutching onto that so strong that she wants to do the same for him, that she wants to cheer him up, that she wants to hold on to him so tight that that darkness in himself won't overtake him, you know? And I kind of wonder if that ties into this unsettled feeling that she's had about Oz and about how she shouldn't allow him to use those powers and to go too far. And to me, that was the whole thing. And then Oz making that statement at the same time when he says it hurts, he's like, I'm trying so hard not to allow whatever it is to spill out of this hole in my heart that I can't even get up again. So even Oz, I think, is starting to realize there's something within him that is problematic and frightening and shouldn't be allowed to be let loose. And this again speaks to my whole idea about Jack being a little questionable, like a little bit questionable. We find out a whole bunch of backstory stuff, obviously. Like, I mean, this is kind of, I think, solving a lot of the stuff that we've had up to this point, like why Isla Yura got involved. Well, we find out that basically he bought this mansion on a lark because it was supposedly haunted and brought misfortune to people, and Isla Yura was into that kind of thing. And he ended up finding the laboratory, and he found the seal and all these notes that the mage that was supposed to be in charge of it had left behind. Supposedly the mage himself had basically died because he was trying to, instead of protecting the seal, he was actually trying to use its powers and harness its powers. So Isla Yura finds out all this stuff and ends up approaching the Night Rays because he realizes that they're in this pretty precarious situation. So the Night Rays, of course, at this point, they don't have an heir that can harness the power of Raven. And they end up only finding out because Vince says, you know, Gil had been chosen to take on the power of Raven like 100 years ago. So, you know, he's probably your best bet, which is pretty much why I believe Night Rays allowed Gil in the first place. And we get that backstory about how they discovered Leo and how Leo was an orphan, and that Duke Night Ray probably knew, well, he did know, that Leo was in fact Glenn Baskerville because Leo described seeing those golden lights and described the hearing the voices and everything else. And so Duke Night Ray had hidden Leo away to use as a bargaining chip either with Pandora or the Baskervilles. So we can see where Night Ray himself was sort of forced into this corner where he was trying to play all these sides to get more power, even to the point where he was willing to put Elliot at risk when he realized that Elliot was now in possession of this very unique and powerful chain. And as much as Vincent can be at times a bit of a despicable character, you have to admire that he really does have that sense of dedication to the people that he likes and respects, and particularly the people that have a positive influence on Gil. And he ends up killing Duke Night Ray basically because he's like, you piss me off. You know, how dare you speak badly of your son who died a valiant and heroic death. I respected Elliot. I liked Elliot. He was one of the only reasons that Gilbert would smile when he was in this house. You know, it is Vincent's dedication to those he loves, and in particular to Gil, that seemed to be about the only really truly redeeming factor about him. And in fact, we find out that as we come to the end of the book and Vincent saves Leo or rescues him from Pandora and basically pretty much convinces him to become Leo Baskerville, we find out that Vincent's wish, that the reason he's helping the Baskervilles, the reason that he's trying to make all of this happen, is that he wants the Baskervilles, particularly Leo now, or, the power of Glenn Baskerville, to erase his existence so that Gil can have a happy life, so that Gil doesn't have to know the pain and struggle of helping Vincent survive. And so in this sense, like, Vincent is such a complex character. Like, we find out that he was the original headhunter, and again, he killed originally, the initial killings he did because, again, these people he felt were plotting against he and Gil because they were these bastards that had been adopted and nobody wanted them, and how dare they even suggest that Gil become the owner of Raven and all this sort of stuff. So he eliminates them before they can act against either he or Gil. And then that ends up being the pattern or the inspiration for Elliot to then use Humpty Dumpty as a pseudo headhunter. So we find out that actually Vincent was the original headhunter and Elliot just copied him. But again, like, you look at Vincent and you're like, man, you're a stone cold killer and you're pretty much unbalanced. But yet you're doing it all just because you think that you can wipe your existence out and then all of this stuff won't matter because none of it will happen. None of it will have happened. A whole new world will be created that you believe will be a happy one for your brother who you love and value more than anyone, including yourself. And you kind of have to admire, or at least I do, that determination and that dedication to someone other than himself. And again, in a lot of ways, I think when we talk about unreliable narratives or narrators, this is where Vincent is so unreliable, because is he even really truly being true to himself when he says he's doing this for Gil? Is he doing it because he talks about, like, remember he says in a couple of episodes or volumes ago, he says how Ada, the look in her eye or whatever, that it reminds him of, it's like that guilt. It evokes guilt in him because it's the same sort of bright light and everything else that Jack had. And so I almost kind of think that Vincent's using Gil as an excuse in a lot of ways, but that for him to undo his own existence is a way of undoing his own guilt. And I kind of have to wonder if that too is him being untruthful to himself, because he's convinced himself it's all for Gil, but really how much of it is also just to eliminate his own, having to deal and cope with the evils that he's committed. So we end this volume with Leo saying, he's with Vincent, and we end the volume with Leo basically like, okay, time to cut my hair, time to look at the world with my own eyes. And we see that his eyes are quite different looking, and Vincent pronounces him my Lord Leo Baskerville. And so that's where we leave this volume, and I really don't know where we're going to go from here, because obviously the Baskervilles are now going to know who has Glenn's soul, because Leo, I think at this point, is pretty much on board with siding with the Baskervilles, and certainly Vincent is going to hand him over to them or tell them. At this point, that I think would accomplish his goals a lot faster and a lot more reliably than if he kept it a secret. And I mean, I don't really think he can keep it a secret at this point. So I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes now, because it feels like, even though this isn't the halfway point, it almost feels like we're turning a corner here, right? Because we've basically eliminated the entire Nightright family. They're gone. The Duke is gone. The mother is gone. All the kids are gone. So the Nightright dukedom is gone. The only thing that's left now is Gil and Vincent. And obviously Vincent is now on the run and is considered a criminal by Pandora. So you have Gil is now a duke, I guess. But then does that mean he's going to get the key to the door? Are we going to find that out a little bit more? Because we had talked about that a little bit earlier, about these balls of energy that they could imbue into anything. And so what happened to that key now that Duke Nightray's dead? And I'm guessing it would somehow go to Gil, particularly because he has Raven, but I don't know where this is going to go. I mean, now it seems to me like you have Gil, who's dedicated to being a valet to Oz, but he is now a duke because he is the heir. He was made the heir to Night Ray, and he's the only, literally the only one left. So how's that going to play out? That's going to be interesting. And now we have the Baskervilles. What are they going to do? Are we going to find out the truth about what happened in Sablier? And what about this whole thing with the intention of the Abyss? The intention of the Abyss is to devour the bee rabbit. Why? Why is it going to devour the bee rabbit? Why does it want to devour the bee rabbit? What will it gain from devouring the bee rabbit? Particularly if the bee rabbit is somehow tied to this girl Alice, who by appearances, and from what, you know, the girl who was Alice in Sablier, she was connected to the intention of the Abyss. So I don't even know where this is going at this point. I mean, it seems to me like as much as we've had a lot of answers now, that we just have all new questions and direction of where we're going. So I'm going to end my discussion on volume number 15 here. Again, I tried not to summarize as much this time because there were just some points I really wanted to talk about. And these volumes are just getting bigger and bigger and better. I'm absolutely loving this series. I'm really glad that a bunch of you who watched my video, 2 years ago or whatever, a long time ago, that said, you need to read the rest of these. You need to do more videos on this series in particular. So glad that I took that advice. Anyway, again, if there's stuff that I've missed or stuff you want to talk about, leave it in the comments. Let's have more of a discussion down there. Thank you so much for watching the video. I'll be back next week with one on volume number 16. I look forward to seeing you then. Until then, bye-bye for now.